unscripted moments in wrestling that made wrestlers furious. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for daily wrestling videos. Number 1. Hulk Hogan vs Jeff Jarrett. Hulk Hogan had so much power during this time that he was allowed to change plans on the fly. At Bash at the Beach 2000, Jeff Jarrett was scheduled to defend the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against Hulk Hogan, and Jeff Jarrett was supposed to win. But Hulk Hogan wasn't a fan of that outcome, so he made sure to creatively change the finish. Jarrett eventually caved into Hogan's demands, but he wasn't going to let the Hulkster get the last laugh. So Jarrett simply came out for his match, and as soon as the bell rang, he laid down on the mat so Hogan could get his win. Vince Russo was at ringside and instructed the entire thing. Hogan grabbed a mic and stated that's why this company is in the damn shape it's in, because of bullshit like this. Hogan then put his boot on Jarrett's chest and got the 3 count, but he wasn't happy about what transpired. But that wasn't it. Vince Russo also grabbed a mic and cut a profanity-laced promo on Hogan. The overall match was pointless because Russo ultimately gave Jarrett the world title back to defend against Booker T later that evening. Now, on one hand, Hogan got his win, but that segment made him look like a snake who was only looking out for number 1. WCW did try to make this into a storyline, but it didn't work. Shoot angles can work if done correctly, but this segment shattered an important illusion about professional wrestling. We're supposed to believe that these matches are legit like MMA or boxing, but it exposes the predetermined process of wrestling and the disgusting politics that play a part in wins and losses. In an unreleased interview from Bubba the Love Sponge show, Hogan was furious why this happened and believed it was a rib. The son of a bitch gets in the ring and lays down. Russo looks at me, climbs on the apron. F you, Hogan. He throws the belt to me. I look down at Jarrett. Is this a rib? Why are you doing this? Jeff goes, you always told me to do what I have to do. He's laying in the middle of the ring and I'm talking to him. Get up and wrestle. Let's stick it up this guy's ass. You're one of the boys. You've always said do what I have to do. I'm doing what I have to do. You're an effing piece of shit. I put my foot on him, then counted it. I took the belt, walked to the back and said F him. I came to the back and said, where's Russo at? I couldn't find him nowhere. I'm shaking so bad, I'm ready to cry. Here comes Russo. He pops on the monitor. I scream, get Nick out of here. I was going to kill Russo, and I didn't want him to see it. Now, Hogan ended up filing a defamation of character lawsuit against Vince Russo. However, it was dismissed in 2002. Number 2. Hulk Hogan whips David Flair. Speaking of Hulk Hogan, who could forget his WCW feud with Ric Flair? It was one of the biggest feuds in the company's short history, and it was a mixed bag. Not terrible, but nothing spectacular either. However, one of the more memorable moments was Hogan whipping David Flair like he stole something from him. Now, this was actually a good and emotional segment that got over how intense the rivalry between Hogan and Ric Flair was. Flair was pissed, and based on the story he should be, but the Nature Boy was genuinely upset over how hard Hogan whipped his son. Reportedly, Hogan got some extra muscle behind those whips, but both David and Ric Flair have gone on record stating that Hogan was supposed to only whip him a couple of times. The Hall of Famer actually whipped David more than 15 times. Flair stated in his book to be the man that no one informed him that Hogan was trying to cut and whip him over and over again. Flair even said that he would never forgive Hogan for what he did to David Flair. But of course, time heals all wounds, as before Hogan's unfortunate passing, Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan had made up and became good friends. It's just a shame that the angle had the lame payoff of David turning on his father a few weeks later, but that's for another list. Number 3. The Montreal Screwjob. Now, we're sure you've heard of the Montreal Screwjob many times before. Long story short, Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart were embroiled in an intense feud, but the problem was that Bret was set to leave WWE shortly after his match against Shawn Michaels. Interestingly enough, Bret Hart had locked in a lengthy and lucrative 20-year deal with WWE that kept him away from WCW. But when 1997 rolled around, Vince McMahon realized he couldn't honor Hart's deal and encouraged him to talk to WCW, who was originally offering a 3-year deal for $9 million. Though it wasn't an easy decision, Hart eventually took the WCW deal, but there was still one issue that they had to solve, and that's Bret needed to drop the WWE Championship in Montreal. However, Bret wasn't feeling the idea. First, he didn't want to lose the belt in his hometown, and second, he didn't want to lose it to Shawn Michaels. Bret and Shawn were never friends during this time. Even though Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels maybe respected each other in the ring, outside of the ring was a different story. Bret remembered how Michaels told him that he would never put him over, and the feeling was mutual for Bret. The WWE Hall of Famer had creative control at the time, so he figured he could change the match finish. Hart had no issues dropping the title on another night against anyone on the roster but Shawn Michaels. Initially, Vince agreed to let the match end in a double DQ. But Vince was so paranoid that Hart would show up to WCW with the championship around his waist, he went behind Bret's back and formed a plan with Gerald Briscoe, Earl Hebner, and Shawn Michaels. The plan was executed to perfection on November 9th, 1997. Michaels put Bret in the sharpshooter and the bell rang, ending the match despite Bret never tapping out. Bret was legitimately furious, and once he realized the screw job, he spit right in Vince McMahon's face and trashed the ringside and made it clear to fans that he was going to WCW. However, the problems didn't get any better once they went backstage. Vince initially locked himself in his office to avoid Bret Hart, but The Undertaker forced him to apologize to the Hitman, and he did, and in return, Bret made sure Vince got a nice long nap, thanks to his fist. It took nearly a decade for Bret, Vince, and Shawn to reconcile, and sure, we got one of the worst matches in Wrestlemania history, but it's nice that hell froze over, and these three were able to get past this infamous moment. Number 4, Scott Steiner's promo on Kimberly Page. And when you talk about Scott Steiner, then it's hard not to bring up the math promo he did in TNA. However, there's a reason Steiner is regarded as one of the best in WCW. Most of Steiner's promos were memorable through his WCW run, but only once saw him and Diamond Dallas Page try to rip each other's eyes out. The entire story starts with Tammy Sytch and Kimberly Page. Page was a valet for DDP in WCW, who also happened to be his wife in real life. Reportedly, Sytch and Page didn't particularly like each other. The reason behind that is not clear. It's quite possible that this was a hot girls feud that only these two understood, but Steiner's promo had nothing to do with a hot girls feud. Apparently, Kimberly Page found a couple of syringes in the locker room and ratted out Tammy Sytch. Sytch was forced to take a drug test, but it came back clean. There's no word on whether this was really Tammy's or not, but once Scott got the word that Kimberly was a snitch, he then cut a scathing promo on DDP and Kimberly. DDP and Steiner weren't feuding at the time, so the promo felt right out of the blue. Once Scott Steiner finished his promo, he went backstage and DDP confronted him immediately. The war of words turned into fists being thrown immediately, with wrestlers quickly separating the two, but that wasn't enough to stop them from locking up again, with Steiner trying to gouge DDP's eyes out. Thankfully, no one was seriously injured, and cooler heads prevailed once DDP and Steiner were able to talk with the help of Eric Bischoff. Number 5. Daniel Puder. The story of Daniel Puder and Kurt Angle lives in infamy. Puder's wrestling career was rather forgettable, but he's forever etched his name in the WWE history books because of two segments. The first is Kurt Angle challenging tough enough contestants to a quick match. The Olympic gold medalist easily got through Christopher Nowinski and issued out the challenge to another cast member. Daniel Puder accepted the challenge and came seconds away from embarrassing the former WWE champion. The two locked up a little bit, with Angle getting the better of Puder in the first few seconds, but then Puder locked in a Chimera lock. The Chimera lock is a very dangerous move, as it can easily break your arm. Puder came seconds away from putting Angle on the injured list until referee Jimmy Corderas got the bright idea to quickly count to 3 while Puder's shoulders were down. Corderas' quick thinking saved Kurt Angle from a serious injury, but the Hall of Famer was furious about the situation. No fights broke out backstage or anything, but Angle was the established veteran and Puder was the rookie. This was a breakout moment for Puder, but nothing ever came out of it. You can really tell Kurt was heated following the brief match. Now, there has been different sides to the story. From Kurt's perspective, he was injured and claims that the match was supposed to be an amateur wrestling bout. From Puder's perspective, he didn't do anything wrong. He pointed out that the rules specifically said no striking, which is something he didn't do. Puder claims that Kurt was pissed and thought he was a moron for doing such a thing. However, this wouldn't be Puder's only memorable moment in his extremely short WWE career. As number 6, WWE wrestlers vs. Puder. Fast forward 2 months later and Daniel Puder got into the main event. Unfortunately for him, that was a painful experience that left the former WWE star bitter and angry. According to Kurt Angle, Puder was quite the arrogant prick backstage, and for all his talents as an MMA fighter, Puder wasn't lighting the world on fire as a pro wrestler, but he was acting like he was. So Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, and Hardcore Holly wanted to teach the rookie a big lesson. Puder was booked as the third entrant in the 2005 Rumble, but it wasn't because WWE wanted to spotlight their new star. It was because it gave Eddie, Benoit, and Hardcore Holly a chance to beat the hell out of the poor kid in the ring. That humiliating experience was the last time Daniel competed on the main roster, and the former WWE star was then sent to OVW as he was no Ken Shamrock. Daniel was eventually released, and though he had brief stints in Ring of Honor and New Japan Pro Wrestling, his career was never able to recover following that Royal Rumble match. Years after the hazing incident, Puder discussed that moment, and he didn't hold back his words when he talked about Benoit, Guerrero, and Hardcore Holly on Hannibal TV. The former WWE star labeled Holly as a profiteer and an insignificant jerk who didn't care about people. And Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit? Well, there's no love lost for those two men. Puder said that he thought that they were nice guys at first, but he boldly stated, "Look who treats people good in this world, and look who treats people like crap, and see what happens to their lives, and they create their own outcomes." Now, it's not surprising that Puder is bitter about the experience, but WWE was a different time during this era where hazing of this nature was pretty common to the rookies. There is a question mark on what could have happened if Daniel opted to re-sign his WWE deal. Would he have been a future Hall of Famer? We never know, but he had two moments that will never be forgotten. Number 7. Kofi Kingston doesn't stay down. Sometimes improvisation isn't because a wrestler doesn't want to follow the rules. It can be because a wrestler simply forgot their spot. That was the case for Kofi Kingston, and he was sentenced to mid-card purgatory for over a decade. In 2009, Kofi's star was beginning to rise, and he was a hot commodity at the time, and Vince decided to test the waters with him in the main event. So Kofi feuded with Randy Orton, and the feud was actually going great for the former IC champion until Kofi became stupid on January 11th, 2010. The ending of the match was supposed to be Kofi taking a punt kick, but he kept getting up and expecting an RKO. This pissed off Randy Orton so much that he gave Kofi the stiffest RKO he could ever do. Orton could be audibly shouting out, and he got the pin, and Kofi got sent back down the card after this match. Reportedly, the former WWE champion told Vince that Kofi wasn't ready for the main event, and Orton's word effectively ruined any sort of big push that Kofi was supposed to get. Now, it's unknown if Kofi was on the verge of winning the WWE title at the time, as there were rumors about him winning the Money in the Bank briefcase. Orton has never talked about this beyond their feud in 2019, but the Viper has stated in past interviews that he was a dick during this time. Kofi was a victim of Orton's immaturity and anger, and though he can't change the past, he was finally rewarded the WWE Championship at WrestleMania 35. Number 8. The Faces of Fear attack Lee Marshall. Meng and Barbarian were known as the Faces of Fear, and they were a solid tag team that didn't go very far in WCW. Perhaps that's why they randomly attacked Lee Marshall during the World War III Battle Royal. Now, the World War III match was already a chaotic bout itself. It was a company signature match that featured 60 wrestlers competing in 3 rings, with the elimination happening once a competitor was thrown over the top rope. During the match in '96, Lee and Larry Zbyszko were announcing when Meng and the Barbarian attacked him out of the blue. Lee was furious about this assault. He knew nothing about this random attack, and he was simply the announcer. There hasn't been a reported reason as to why the tag team assaulted the WCW commentator, and there's no history of beef between these men. There's no rumors that this was a hazing prank, and it's unknown if Meng and the Barbarian were punished for the attack. Nothing ever came out of this situation, but a scary moment for an announcer who surprisingly didn't sue the pants off WCW over this random stunt. Number 9. Brian Pillman puts his hands on Bobby Heenan. In January 1996, during WCW's Clash of Champions 32 pay-per-view, Brian Pillman, who was gaining attention with his edgy loose cannon persona, delivered one of the most memorable unscripted moments in wrestling history. In the middle of the match with Eddie Guerrero, Pillman lurched toward the commentary desk, grabbing Bobby the Brain Heenan by the collar, which startled him enough to snap, shouting out, "What the F are you doing on live television?" Heenan had undergone neck surgery, and there was a ban in place of wrestlers going nowhere near him at the time. The outburst wasn't planned. Heenan was watching the monitors and believed it was a fan who touched him, leading to his genuine outburst. Later, Heenan apologized on air for the profanity, recognizing how unexpected and uncharacteristic it was. Once Pillman became aware of Heenan's fragile condition, he managed to apologize backstage. And number 10. Party's over, Grandpa. During the 2014 episode of Raw, which happened to coincide with Hulk Hogan's birthday, Brock Lesnar, who was backed by Paul Heyman, stormed into the ring. He seized the microphone, and Lesnar delivered a sharp and unscripted insult towards Hogan, saying,
"Party's over, Grandpa."
The moment wasn't part of any planned storyline, and the insult cut deep. Hogan looked visibly furious, clearly not anticipating such disrespect. Before Hogan could retaliate, John Cena rushed into the ring, ready to go to war with Lesnar. Fans even thought Cena might challenge Lesnar right there and then, instead of waiting for their scheduled SummerSlam showdown. Despite Cena's presence diffusing the situation, it remained clear that Hogan was genuinely upset with the line. Hogan later addressed the incident, stating, "All I gotta say is, Brock, you can't say all that stuff. You can't say that stuff in front of my wife and kids. It's not cool, brother. When he starts throwing my name around with my wife and kids, it's crossing the line." The unscripted moment created palpable tension in the ring and served as a powerful setup for the Lesnar vs. Cena match at SummerSlam. And number 11, Goldberg gets his head sprayed. On January 4th, 1999, WCW Nitro delivered one of its most infamous moments in wrestling history, the finger poke of doom. After Nash laid down for Hollywood Hogan, allowing Hogan to reclaim the WCW World Heavyweight Championship with a single poke to the chest, the reunited NWO celebrated in the ring. Goldberg, who had been WCW's unstoppable force and recently lost his undefeated streak to Nash, was ready for some much-needed payback and ran in to give them all a beatdown. Even when Goldberg was heavily outnumbered, he managed to beat them down. However, the numbers game became stronger thanks to a betrayal from Lex Luger, as well as Scott Hall, who was armed with a taser, and all managed to incapacitate him. But the assault didn't stop there. In a humiliating act, the group spray-painted NWO across Goldberg's back. Now, before the show, Goldberg told the members of the NWO to avoid spray-painting his head during the beatdown. However, Scott Steiner and Hulk Hogan didn't get that memo and sprayed his bald head jet black and red. Goldberg was legit pissed off with this unscripted moment, even noticeably breaking character to acknowledge it. But there you have it, folks, unscripted moments that made wrestlers furious. Be sure to leave your comments down below, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.